Welcome to this explainer, everyone. Today, we're stepping right into the mud and the absolute misery of the World War I trenches to uncover one of the most terrifying and, honestly, most rapid developments in military history. We're going to look at the sudden, horrifying evolution of the modern sniper. Now, sure, sharpshooters were certainly a known commodity on the battlefield long before the Great War, but the massive, static deadlock of those trench networks, it was about to evolve them into the absolute most hated men in the world. An invisible terror that literally changed the psychology of war forever. Okay, let's dive into this, because this is where the daily reality for a frontline soldier became purely nightmarish. Just picture this for a second. You survive a massive artillery bombardment. You survive a chaotic frontal assault across no man's land. But then you step out of your dugout just to fetch a little bit of water. Or maybe you just cup your hands to light a cigarette in the dark. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a single shot rings out. That mundane, everyday task just became a guaranteed death sentence. If you peeked your forehead over the trench parapet twice in the exact same place, a bullet between the eyes was practically guaranteed. I mean, men were dropping dead before the crack of the rifle even echoed across the field. But before you go thinking these unseen marksmen had some easy, untouchable job, consider this absolutely staggering statistic: 90%. That is the brutal casualty rate these highly lethal shooters ultimately face themselves. We are talking about extreme, life-or-death stakes every single second they were deployed. If you were a sniper, your life expectancy was incredibly short. You might be the deadliest person in your entire sector, but one wrong move, or just a tiny puff of dust kicked up after you fired your rifle. That 90% statistic instantly became your reality. So how did this all start? Well, the deadlock of the trenches created what you could call a perfect storm. Basically, four major elements collided all at once. You had high-quality telescopic sights, brand new advancements in camouflage, organized tactical training, and, of course, static trench lines packed with literally thousands of sitting targets. Older historical sharpshooters maybe had one or two of those advantages, right? But the WWI sniper had all four simultaneously. And initially, it was the Germans who entirely dominated this space. They had a massive advantage because they possessed the most advanced optical industry in the whole world at the time. Their rifle scopes were light years ahead of what the British or French could even dream of making. You pair those superior optics with a deep-rooted German shooting and hunting culture, and man, they unleashed total devastation on the Allied forces. Now, what's really interesting about this tiny number 5 is that its impact on the war was absolutely massive. In those early days of trench warfare, 5 was the average number of British soldiers killed every single day in any given trench section by unseen German shooters. Just think about that. 5 men every day in every single section. A German sniper would creep out into no man's land at dawn, settle into a hidden position, lie perfectly motionless for a whole day, and just wait for an enemy head to appear. It was a slow, agonizing, and highly efficient bleed of enemy manpower.
And we've got to understand, these weren't just random shots being fired into the dirt. Snipers were highly, highly strategic. They followed a grim target hierarchy, specifically designed to paralyze the enemy. First up, they systematically prioritized officers, basically decapitating the enemy's leadership. Then came artillery observers, machine gunners, and messengers. Essentially, anyone whose loss would cripple the enemy's ability to coordinate attacks or inflict mass damage. This calculated psychological pressure meant that everyone in the trench lived in a constant state of anxiety. You never knew when the sniper would strike or who was going to be next.
It actually took months, but the British High Command finally realized this wasn't just a string of lucky shots. They were facing a systematic form of organized warfare, and they were desperate for a fix. Especially because German snipers had started firing from behind thick steel plates with tiny little loopholes in them. The sheer desperation of the Allied countermeasures was staggering. Get this. To pierce those German steel plates, the British actually brought in African elephant guns. But the brutal flaw? The monstrous recoil from firing a massive safari rifle from a prone position frequently shattered the poor shooter's collarbone. Ouch. They also tried issuing Galilean sights, which were these crude two-lens civilian optics that barely helped at all. And when all else failed, they just blindly guessed where the sniper was hiding and saturated the whole area with completely inaccurate artillery and gas barrages. But this sniper war wasn't just confined to the mud of the Western Front. Let's shift our focus over to 1915, to the Gallipoli Nightmare. This Allied invasion against the Ottoman Empire devolved into the exact same trench deadlock, but with a terrifying twist. The trenches were unbelievably close. We're talking literally at hand grenade range. The Ottomans held the high ground, which put the Allied trenches in plain, inescapable view. Turkish snipers were insanely deadly here. They were taking out hundreds of exposed soldiers who didn't even realize they were visible. They even managed to snipe Australian Major General Bridges. The peril was so extreme here that it forced the Allies to invent and mass-produce periscope rifles. Literally, just so soldiers could shoot back without raising their heads above the dirt. Despite the immense danger of the job, the efficiency of this new class of soldier was totally undeniable. Several top snipers across all the fighting nations racked up over 100 kills each. 100! Think about that level of grim, solitary productivity. But remember that 90% casualty rate we talked about earlier? They achieved these staggering numbers while living under the constant, suffocating threat of instant death. If an enemy sniper was harassing a line of it too effectively, the opposing side wouldn't always even bother aiming back. They would just wildly bombard his suspected location with heavy trench mortars and gas shells until he was either entirely obliterated or forced to move. And this brilliantly illustrates the immense psychological toll that separated the sniper from the standard infantryman. See, a regular infantry kill usually happens in chaotic, mid-range, or hand-to-hand combat. It is driven purely by an impersonal, frantic survival instinct. But a sniper kill? It's intimate. It is a calculated execution. The sniper would watch his target for an extended period, seeing an unaware victim's face crystal clear through a magnifying lens, shooting a man who was just trying to use the toilet or grab rations, a man who cannot even see you to fight back. Well, that doesn't sit right with a normal human psyche. This intense moral ambiguity led to deep psychological trauma for the shooters, causing severe cases of shell shock, which is exactly what we recognize today as PTSD. To truly grasp the horror of this environment, we have to impartially look at the exceptionally brutal tactics employed to maximize terror. Some snipers would intentionally shoot a man in the stomach, knowing it would take him much longer to die. This turned his agonizing cries into a psychological weapon against the whole trench. Others would deliberately wound a soldier just to bait his comrades out into the open, creating this horrific dilemma for the medics. Do you ignore your friend's cries or risk getting shot yourself? Because of these deeply disturbing tactics, snipers universally lost the privilege of surrender. If a soldier was captured carrying a scoped rifle, they were, in the absolute best-case scenario, executed right on the spot. To survive this merciless, no-quarter environment, sniper tactics had to evolve into an almost bizarre game of extreme deception. Fun fact, the French actually pioneered military camouflage, a word directly adopted from their language, meaning to disguise. Snipers went to unbelievable lengths to stay hidden. Under the cover of a noisy nighttime bombardment to mask the sound, soldiers would actually replace a real shattered tree standing out in no man's land with a hollowed-out fake replica. So when morning came, a sniper was secretly sitting inside it. They even went as far as creating replica dead horse corpses. No joke. They'd swap a real horse carcass for a fake one equipped with a hollow belly for the sniper to hide in. They even ran a hidden telephone wire back to the trench so the sniper could just call in and report what he saw. So, with snipers hiding inside fake trees and hollow horse corpses, the Allies had to get equally creative to hunt them down. This brings us to a seemingly ridiculous yet mathematically brilliant procedure, the dummy head triangulation trap. Here's exactly how they did it. Step 1. An Allied soldier would slowly raise a fake papier-mâché head above the trench. Sometimes it even had a rubber tube attached, so a soldier down below could blow cigarette smoke right through its mouth to make it look totally real. Step 2, they'd wait for the hidden enemy sniper to take the bait and shoot the dummy. Step 3, they'd pull the head down and really carefully measure the exact entry and exit angle of the bullet hole. Finally, by repeating this in a few different spots, they could intersect these trajectory lines on a map. Right where the lines crossed, boom, they successfully triangulated the exact coordinates of the hidden sniper and wiped his position off the map with artillery. So the crucial point is that out of this incredibly intense, terrifying cat-and-mouse game, the modern blueprint for sniping was forged. The overwhelming physical and mental demands of steering through a scope for hours on end, spotting heavily camouflaged targets, triangulating threats, and, just trying to stay alive. It was simply too much for one person to handle alone. This hyper-lethal environment forced the birth of the standard that militaries still rely on today, the two-man sniper team. One shooter, one observer. Tracing this escalation over the years, we see how the momentum completely shifted as the war dragged on. Back in 1914, we saw total German dominance via their superior optics. But by 1915, that Gallipoli deadlock forced the Allies to innovate with things like those periscope rifles we talked about. Fast forward to 1917 and 1918, and the momentum had completely reversed. The British, Canadians, and Australians had caught up and actually surpassed the Germans by establishing permanent sniper schools and integrating them as a regular, highly trained military asset. By 1918, the Americans arrived and immediately sent their absolute best shooters straight to these British schools. But just as the Allies really perfected the craft, the German Spring Offensive broke the trench stalemate. Suddenly, late 1918 saw a return to open, mobile warfare. Without static lines and oblivious targets, the snipers' ideal killing ground simply vanished, and their highly specialized role was rendered largely obsolete. As the war finally ended, the specialized sniper sections in most nations were quickly disbanded. They essentially went into a deep sleep until a new global conflict would eventually wake them. But this leaves us with a profound and, frankly, haunting question to end our explainer on. When the lines moved and the war ended, the snipers vanished from the battlefield. But what happens to the human mind when the camouflage is finally removed? These men, who spent years intimately watching and calculating the execution of unaware victims through a glass lens, had to somehow return to a normal civilian life. The physical war was over, sure, but for the invisible terrors of the trenches, the psychological battle was likely just beginning. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Until next time, keep learning and keep asking those big questions.